Welcome to Paradigm Shifters. This is Veronica Antwistle, and I want to introduce to you Chloe Goodchild. And she's going to bring some wonderful, wonderful experiential information about consciousness and your voice and how to use your voice to, what would we say, to transcend identity, all the kinds of trappings that we get stuck in as human beings. You can use your voice to go through that and touch the real you. Would you say that that's right, Chloe?
Oh, absolutely, Veronica, and it's really listening to the voice that is beneath the personality voice, the voice of the ego, and to how we can go about retraining the ego to serve your true sound, which is the source of your true self, essentially.
I
Yeah.
love that, the voice of the ego. I don't think I've heard it said that way before.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It gets a bad press because it's so distracting.
What, the ego?
Yeah, you know what I mean? I mean, people are sort of really busy trying to annihilate it and kill it and send it somewhere else, and I'm kind of more interested in including it because it really does have a role. I mean, it obviously is there for a purpose, and I would say its purpose is to uh, restore curiosity, to be fascinated, to be inquiring, to be wondrous at what this sound is that's coming out of the mouth. And
Well,
once
no,
the ego starts doing that, it's great.
well, it sounds to me, and paying attention to, I haven't read very much into your book, as you know, I had trouble opening it and so on. But in
Okay.
any case, I've listened to as many things as I can, and I'm very, very touched because I often say to people, your voice rings the wisdom out of your life experiences. Now, I don't know if you see it that way, but then when you're talking about the voice, it just seems very liberating that the ego itself could be shined up and be less attached to all kinds of what identity constructions that it's bought into that probably shouldn't. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, very, very clear as a bell. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I realized when actually did, for a period of time in my life, experience the absence of ego, that I realized at that point that it was going to be important to respect its return, as in, my life on Earth as a human being. Because, without the ego, what I found was that you just simply sit like a stone in this kind of blissful state, uh, which is amazing, which is incredible. When you have a 7-year-old daughter to bring up and, bills to be paid and a personal calling to deliver into the world, and share with others, you to actually just sit there like a stone and in that bliss is the most extraordinary grace. There's no question about it. But then, of course, it's how does one actually uh, marry up all these worlds of the self so that we can live an integrated, unified, and resonant life. I like the word
Well,
resonant. Yeah.
actually, that's so interesting because you're talking about one of the conundrums we all have is how do you live in 3D when you're trying to ascend, if you will?
Yeah, yeah. Well, what's really interesting in the no mind state is how there's no ascending or descending, because, but I do deeply hear what you're saying, which is how we can, my understanding of what you're saying perhaps is how we can uh, let go the tight shoe of the mind so that we can realize.
I like that. That's a great expression, the tight shoe.
So we can just sort of realize that we are uh, molecules within the vastness of this universe, the extraordinary omniverse that we live in. Uh, and that it's our job to really uh, come home to ourselves in such a way, as we realize that we are the molecular essence of the universe, but we also have a distinct job and role to play, which is where the voice is so fascinating because there is literally not one single voice on this planet that is like any other, and that really interests me a lot. So it's like how
Like
we.
fingerprints. Hmm.
Yeah, and how do we come to terms with the distinctness of and our complete separateness? As Rumi, the poet, says, how can we be separated and in union at the same time? And that is where the voice is an extraordinary bridge between the worlds, because it really assists us to navigate the interface between our unique personal lives with all its suffering and pain and joys and ecstasy and obstacles and uh, rewards and achievements and fulfillment, um, at the same time as realizing that none of that actually exists. Once you, once you enter the universal field, you realize that you are just simply this. It's like you're just in the presence. You're just an interconnected molecular little speck of dust, particle of dust, just dancing in the universe, basically.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I often think, if we could just be, it's
Mm,
it's similar concept if we were just in the be of ourselves
yes.
without
Yeah.
anything else. And you talk here about what's the exact phrase? It's the sound of silence, though. Hearing the silence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, silence. It that really is the absolute focus of the Naked Voice work, really, because it came out. It was really out of silence that the Naked Voice, this experience of it was happened, if you like. And so silence is really these days, instead of when people come for to explore their voice with us in the singing field of the Naked Voice, whether it's online or live or in person or in a in-depth retreat, a lot of people have this idea, which we've been completely socially conditioned into, that the voice is all its purpose is for entertainment. It's for to impress others. It's to it's all about some kind of outer sound that must be heard. And so there's that. Rather than realizing that the voice actually is a it is a catalyst for directing the mind back to its source.
Oh,
So,
wow, that's wonderful.
right, rather than going out, it's more of an interior direction,
Hmm.
which is what I suddenly realized as a choral singer for many, many, many years, which I loved so much. But still, there was something about choral singing that was just eternally taking me up and out of myself. And it wasn't, so I had to go to like Africa and India and Middle East, where I happened upon, Sufism and spiritual philosophies of the voice that really see the voice as absolutely central and the ground of embodiment, and that embodiment must happen, and the voice is the catalyst for that embodiment of one's own true nature, one's spirit.
Hmm.
So the body then becomes the home of spirit, and the voice is the ambassador or the mouthpiece of that experience. And I hadn't really found that in the West. So the choral voice then, to my utter surprise, became a solo voice. It became a kind of when I came back from India, it became an absolute way of in which I could just express my gratitude.
Well,
So
tell me this so you could actually translate that comprehension or that deepening into the doing part of singing. You could
it's
translate that and carry that into the doing section called
you've
the
got
voice, the chorus.
you've got it, you've got it. And
Hmm.
then I suppose what was even more surprising was realizing that I actually was singing on my own. That I actually was becoming more of a soloist that was actually investigating my own voice, like within my body, as experiencing my body as a kind of sonic laboratory
Hmm.
for self-inquiry, basically. Self-inquiry rather than a means by which I could impress others. It was a means by which I could express my true nature.
And you could find more and more about your own in-depth,
Yes.
beliefs, all those things that we seek out in ourselves. I love that you referred to Ramana Maharshi and Who Am I, because that's such an important thing that I use in my world and with my clients, you know. And I
Oh,
love that you were using the voice. Let me see, the voice as a tool to do that as well.
yeah, yeah. Essentially, in our world, the voice, we have three practices. Uh, One is sound awareness. So, in your developing skills to enable you to live in harmony with your true nature. And then that then leads, those skills lead you into what I call sound intelligence, which is how to communicate creatively with your own conscience, with your own, really, with your own true inner morality, not some kind of outer conditioned morality, but with your sense of how can we really revere human life on earth and all life on earth, animal life on earth, the mother nature life on earth. And then the third one is that those sound intelligence skills, which are really where we're integrating our experience of the language of silence with the language of poetry and spoken song into the language of the sung voice. And that sound intelligence has a way of integrating these different, what have been separated modalities of communication into one unified field of communication, coming from oneself into the world and back again. And then that leads into what we call sound wisdom skills, how to literally transmit the wisdom of your spirit.
And actually, that's the contribution individuals can make into the collective, isn't it, or to the whole?
That's absolutely it. That's absolutely
So
it.
before we go any farther, this is so fascinating. I realize I haven't said anything about how all this awoke in you, how it awakened in you, and as a child or as a young person, you grew into this naturally and went to college for it. Or I know a little about your history, so let's share with people what awakened you.
Well, as you were referring to earlier, there is really from the earliest days because I was partially deaf for a period of time between the ages of 4 and 7. Be- yeah, traumatic surgery on my ears. I'd had my tonsils out, and the surgery hadn't worked. I was found by my mother hemorrhaging in my sleep, hemorrhaging to death, basically. And so she, God bless her, instinctually just knew something was really wrong. There was blood all over the pillow, and I was up and out of that bed, and we were off to hospital. And so that saved my life. But I think what it did was, because what also happened was the traumatic impact on the ears, on my ears for a period of time, enabled me to really start listening to myself and why am I here questions.
Because you couldn't really hear externally, is that right? Or partially?
Exactly.
Hmm.
I could not hear, just partially. I could hear partially, but it was very muffled. And my mum took me out of school basically because it was just too awkward to be there. So I had this kind of time at home and also the opportunity to really start engaging with silence, which as a young child, I suppose I didn't really, I didn't have a very formed mental capacity at that point because I was only, I was still very young. I was in the kind of magical realm of childhood. And that also really helped. So I would spend a lot of time in nature. My dad was a priest, and so we found ourselves in these like church houses, beautiful house in Horsham in Sussex, which had literally gardens on all sides,
Oh
and
my.
it was very very beautiful. And you just get given these buildings by the church; they give you, and so that enabled me just to walk out into nature. And I remember having very intense experiences just watching birds blinking. And there was this one particular thrush. I remember watching it and really being aware that it was talking to me. And no words were required, no sound even. It was just there was a kind of furtive presence there that was fascinating, and things like that. And so the presence, this connection with presence, I would say was activated. The
Mhm.
wonder that children experience as presence, that just basically, I think it just extended itself into my teens because when my ordinary hearing came back, I realized that I had to find a way of transiting into the more noisy, clunky, uh, you know, uh, very sort of abrasive world of social communication. And so it was then I realized that music and choral sound was a fantastic bridge
Mm.
into sort of connecting my very deep sense of wanting to know why was I here and what was going on and why was I a bit of a weirdo, because I've had this, and so I was a bit of a dreamer and I used humor a lot as a way of, connecting with people because I realized that people somehow there was a really, particularly I went to this very academic school and it was very serious mental stuff. And even though I was reasonably good at that, uh, I was already by the age of 13 very dissatisfied and disillusioned with the education system.
Mhm.
And I think it all comes back to these early childhood, wounded healer experience that really, I would say, catalyzed my life's calling.
Yeah, that wounded healer, that's a very important phase for a lot of us actually, isn't it?
Oh God, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
So
It's
that's
the
precious in a way.
Oh yeah, big time,
How
big
long
time.
how long did it take you to really be grateful for it? What I mean is, did you have to really push your way out of it and re-embody your strength and get through the 3D demands and all that? Was it hard?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was very, very hard because I just have an Aries nature, so my tendency was to rebel. I was stubborn. Um, I was described as arrogant. I remember that the head girl of our school, she said, "You're only 11 years old, and why? Who do you think you are? Just speaking out on, which seemed like to me just quite normal questions to be asking about why is everyone teaching me everything but what I want to actually know, which is why I'm here."
Did anybody answer you? That's a wonderful question.
Well, I remember my music teacher looking at me somewhat helplessly but very sweetly and saying, "I wish I could answer that question for you, but maybe just stay with the music program and see if that can help you out." And it certainly did. I realized, the music. It was really music that led me into the kind of mystical understanding of why we're here
And
and
did you
all of.
play instruments or was it always vocal?
I know I played the clarinet, which I
Mhm.
loved, and then a little bit later I played the cello. I played the piano to a large degree. Yeah, I used to spend hours just improvising on the piano as a kid. I was very blessed that by now we were in London. My dad had become a bishop, and we had a house, a very tall, thin house in the middle of Notting Hill Gate in London in the
Nice.
60s. Yeah, it was, because there we were, and I remember going to see Pink Floyd for the first time, and
Oh, wow. Did you like that?
oh my God, those
Mhm.
those experiences were essential because I was in a Christian environment, which meant that on the one hand, I was being fed this incredible information and storyline of the Christian logos, but on another level, at a level of ethics and morality and sexuality, I was being, advised to separate my body from my spirit. That sexuality was a lesser thing, and it only happens when you get married, and it was very, very archaic. So I had some fantastic hammer and tongs with my dad about that. He was great. We had some good good discussions about that because at the same time, I was really grateful to him for the extraordinary mystical uh, introduction to the story of Christ, which
And he was very supportive even though you were going through the 60s, right?
right. Well, I think the truth is, probably along with many other parents, was that, you know, there we were in our teens and we were right in the middle of that revolution, you know, of sexuality and love and, you know, let's really change the program. And that paradigm was utterly terrifying to my parents, I think. They were
I'll
just
bet.
totally, you know. And because he was a bishop in London, it was a very public field we were in all the time. So we had to be seen to be believed to be the good child girls.
Isn't it funny your last name is Goodchild? But
I know,
but
I like,
also it reminds me of how the preacher's child is often called the PK, the preacher's
mm,
kid, and is often, at least that's true in Canada and the
oh,
States.
really? Yeah,
And usually they're cutting up somehow. They're usually kind of breaking out.
yeah. Well, they say that, you know, people that have the most challenging lives are either the daughters of or sons of priests or psychiatrists.
Yeah.
You know,
But tell me, your dad was mystical though, wasn't he? He was a priest and what do you say, a
well,
bishop, but he also was mystical, was he not?
well, do you know what? That is really awesome, your question, because that was my major difficulty with him, that he was a very Protestant Episcopal bishop, appearing to be, and nevertheless, he delivered these incredible sermons. But the actual mystical side was the piece that for me was missing right up until he was literally in the last hours of his life.
Oh, really?
And it was there that I met the mystical. And it was,
Oh,
I treasure that forever. Because I know when I went to India and I came back, he was much more open because I was much less argumentative. I was much more spacious and accommodating and inclusive. And that was a great relief, probably to everyone.
but that's wonderful. That's the passion of being, isn't it, that
Yes,
you had when you were younger there? Hmm.
you've absolutely got it. And then, so our relationship really started to heal and mature, but it wasn't until he was in the last throes of his life on Earth that he demonstrated to me his mystical understanding, and that was a great relief to be able to be in conversation with him about it. And for him, he literally died with his eyes wide open, absolutely present, staring out into the universe. Three breaths, and he was gone. You know, and
Oh,
I remember him saying, literally, because I started singing, because he'd always wanted me to make a version of the Lord's Prayer and to make a sung version of it. And I bring in it just one of the first solo recordings I made called "Thy Will Be Done,"
thy
and
will be done.
I will be done. It's in my Davy album Sound
Hmm.
as an expression of unchanging consciousness. But so I was singing there with him, and as I was singing the Lord's Prayer, we got to, you know, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. And he just was like in his bed. He started struggling, like he was throwing off invisible clothes into, and my image was one of him just throwing himself back into the ocean of being. Really, that was the vision I had as he was, and he was roaring because he had this Cheney Stokes breathing, so he couldn't really breathe properly anymore.
Hmm.
But he was trying to connect with the sound that I was singing, and just prior to that, he, you know, when he was still able to speak, he'd been saying things like, "It just doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Jew, does it?
Oh,
It just
wow.
doesn't
Good for
matter."
him. Hmm.
So that was a great relief to hear that. And, you know, we really recognized we met. We met in the one place.
Oh,
The only,
that is what a treasure that is.
yeah, it was an absolute moment of grace, you know.
Wow.
And
I
yeah.
love that. So let's see, how did you go from being in the course, and I love the experience with your father because to me when people see their parents in a state of change, a
Mm,
state of personal evolution by choice. Isn't
mm.
that very healing for all the ways we've been stuck as younger people?
Oh, it's such a relief, isn't it? You know?
Oh, yeah, and that's a very good story. So
Yeah.
let's go back to Chloe. So you've been to England, to India and back, but actually there's a lot more detail there. Um, what what started you on the individual singing path? You've already spoken to part of it, but did you do more of it in India? Was it part of chanting? What was it?
Well, I was in Crete, actually, on the island of Crete in the late 80s. I started having these dreams about this woman massive Indian woman who would swallow me whole and spew me out as a man and a woman.
Wow, wonderful.
They were really powerful dreams, and I didn't know who this woman was until I and my partner at that time were uh, taking Ramdas around Europe and supporting his retreats.
How
And
did you
so,
get to know Ram Dass? That's pretty exciting.
well, that was through my dear friend Roger Houston, who now lives in California and is one of my oldest friends. And he and I were together for about 12 years.
Hmm.
And during that time, he actually had been an Alexander teacher, an Alexander technique teacher, and had worked in the Bristol Cancer Help Centre where we were both living. He then became a writer and has written many extraordinary books. Uh, and you might know the book 10 Poems to Change Your Life.
Oh, I have heard it, yeah, of it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so Roger had this extraordinary capacity to um, connect with collective voices. And there we were in England, and he was sitting in England watching these mighty collective voices flying from America to Germany and never really stopping in England. So he decided to ring them up. He went over to America. He met Gabriel Roth.
Oh,
He met
good.
Robert Bly, Ramdas, James Hillman, Marianne Woodman, Arnie Mindell, and started connecting with all these people. And he's a very, very good interviewer. And so he was interviewing them and managed to bring them, to persuade them, to inspire them to come to England and to Europe. And then we were running something called the Open Gate, and that enabled Ramdas to come over through the Open Gate, and we ran these retreats. And it was
Oh,
one of,
wonderful. Hmm.
yeah, it was at one of Ramdas's retreats. He said, I want to um, give a slideshow of the greatest saints of the 20th century. And so this slideshow, so he was showing Ramana Maharshi and Nityananda and Sai Baba and on and on and on and on. And Anandamayi Ma, one of the great women luminaries of 20th century India, came up on the screen. And as soon as I saw that image, I realized that's who I've been dreaming of.
Wow.
So she really was instrumental, to cut a very long story short, in a kind of alchemy that went on inside me, which I can only describe as a kind of merging of an understanding of non dual teachings with uh, musical expression. So it was really through my engagement and my meeting with her and with other teachers in India, that's to say, teachers of Advaita, non separateness, as well as classical vocal Indian teachers, that I began to see that I had a role to somehow integrate my understanding of non duality through the vehicle of my voice.
By this point, were you as aware of the depth and the impact of the voice when one works with it? Do you know what I mean? What you were talking about is how it deepens and kind of unfolds the essence of your being, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the experience, I was very blessed to spend uh, a life-changing week with someone who's now called Papaji, who was called Harilal Punja, He was an engineer, but he was one of the great devotees of Ramana Maharshi, and he received a transmission from Ramana Maharshi, and it was really his spending 6 days in his presence that disappeared my mind. And it was really that experience that then started to connect me with the energy field of the body and with the emotional and the elemental nature of the human body. And I literally learned, as I say, through the sonic laboratory of my own self, because I came back to England in this completely unified state. And what happened was that, rather like you hear in near death experiences, that when my ordinary self came back again, in other words, when the egoic mind returned, uh, there was a kind of collision of um, ener- energy
Hmm.
in my body. So what happened was there was so much energy pouring through my system from the root up to the crown that I was literally being thrown off the floor. So it was a sort of what people describe as Kundalini experiences, or where the body is literally having to learn at a very great rate, very fast, how to absorb, how to integrate a quality of aliveness and life that it's not used to. And so it was really mantra and the experience of mantra that I'd learned from being in India and sitting with yogis by the river and so on, that I started to realize the power of the spiritual power of sound. So I started just sounding these mantras into the tonal energies of my body, from the root into the pelvis, into the solar plexus, into the heart center, into the throat, the third eye, the back of the head, the crown, and beyond.
It's
And then
exquisite energy work, is it not?
it was and is, yes, it is. It's the work. That is why we're here.
Well, we're going to play
It's
a couple of maybe just bars of some of these mantras that you have recorded with such beauty,
yes, yes. I would love to share. Uh, well, there's the Gayatri mantra.
which is
Uh,
my favorite thing.
oh, really?
Oh,
Oh,
yes.
that's wonderful. Which, of course, uh, you will know so deeply as the mantra of the invocation of the 10,000 suns. And the words are so extraordinary. The words are so contemporary. Like Pargo Devasya Dimahi. Pargo meaning fear and burning splendor at the same time. So that the translation being, may all my fear be transformed in the burning splendor of the 10,000 suns. And you sort of think,
Mm.
where did that come from? These are ancient, thousands of year old, uh, transmissions of the spirit, really, through sound.
Mm.
Mm.
That is absolutely beautiful.
Mm.
I love your versions of these mantras are wonderful, and I do love the Gayatri.
Well, even to be utterly simple, the Om itself, of course, is the absolute central foundation of all mantras.
Mm.
So that,
Now, I want to say this is a little bit of a digression, but I think it's a good one. When you said that when you were with Papa G, that's where you could lose your mind after a week with him or during that week with him, right?
mm-hmm.
And then you spoke about reintegrating or trying to bring it all together later. But it flashed on me. I went, well, a near death experience is like that, isn't it?
It has to be, doesn't it? I mean, certainly the experience of people that I know, and that that we both will probably know of people who've spoken about these near-death experiences. It is, you are literally letting go the tight envelope of the body
Hmm.
in order to realize your connection with the vastness, and dissolving into the vastness
And
of
all those
being.
beliefs that keep us caged, they have to be dissipated, or else you can't have the breadth of experience, can you?
You've got it. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
making me think a lot, so I kind of forget my orderly mind here because it's going in these wonderful lateral expansions. Thank you for that. So from there, you've turned this into an amazing, I will call it a business just to give it that 3D kind of dimensional awareness. I mean, you've turned this transcendent personal journey for people into a business. I want you to talk a bit about your book and your workshops and how lucky people are to go through the process with you to tap those incredible spiritual places through their
Mhm.
own voice, right?
It's been an incredible privilege to first of all realize when I came back from India that all I want to do now is to express my gratitude for what's been given.
Ah,
And so to my astonishment, because I'm a serious introvert, they say in all those maps, of the Enneagram and so on, I am, not someone who, even though I'm very happy to stride out onto a stage in Madison Square Gardens with 20,000 people, uh, if as required, my nature is really to want to be very interior and contemplative. And so I was quite surprised to find, but I was in this kind of altered state. And so I just started walking into the local recording studio and saying, I just want to express my gratitude through sound. And so I just started sounding with the sacred chants, with the mantras that I'd been given, influenced by some of the ragas and so on that I picked up while I was in India and so on. But I also realized that this experience really had an outer dimension, that it was going to be something by which I could actually serve others in the world and serve humanity by simply exploring this question: who am I and where does this voice come from? And so recording songs, mantras, and so on was one way. And then another way was I just literally thought to myself, I mean, I was already a kind of vocal therapist working more psychologically with one to one with people, but it wasn't until I
You were
came.
using the voice then? You were using tones and mantras then?
I just started that because I had actually been a music teacher. I was a trained music teacher. I was teaching in secondary schools. I taught in one of the most dangerous schools in North London, where I was the only white teacher. My predecessor had been stabbed to death.
Oof.
And so it was a pretty kind of radical experience of education, because I wanted to find out just you know whether music education was alive and happening in schools. And this was in the 90s, the 80s actually. So I was so disillusioned by the low status of music education that I left teaching formally in schools. And then I thought to myself, right, there must be a training out there for me to explore how the voice is an instrument of spirit and how we can bring that into our education system. So again, I couldn't find one. So I thought maybe I'm just supposed to start one.
Hmm.
So I just put up a notice in my local community hall here in Bristol, and I just said, would anyone like to find their voice? And
Yay.
and to my astonishment, a lot of people showed up.
Oh, I'm so excited because it's so important to me as well. Can you give people a taste, even though this is a global radio show, can you give people a taste of what they could start with finding their own voice?
Well, let's see. Well, obviously, the first thing is to connect with the breath, with your breath, with your feet, with 1,000 miles below your feet, just being aware of the sensation of the bottom of your feet, how they connect with the ground, down 1,000 miles into the ground, like roots going down into the ground, and then being aware of that same energy as you connect with that coming up through the body, vertically up and out, and rising up the spine, up into the crown of the head, and up and out into the universe, 1,000 miles up into the universe. And similarly, to bring that awareness down into the middle of the chest and to be aware of the energy in front of you, 1,000 miles in front of you, 1,000 miles behind you, to the right and left of you. And that's a very quick whistle stop tour of a way in which you just ground your physical presence and arrive, and you start by saying, I am here. I am here. And, or you might want to say, who is here? Or who am I in this body being here? And then what happens is you can just start by toning the root chakra, the pelvis, the solar plexus, the heart center, throat, third eye, pineal gland, and crown. And that
Is the toning a spontaneous sound?
so that would be, you might be familiar with the seven chakra mantra, we call it the Lam Vam Ram Yam Hum Om So Hum. Do you know those?
I have heard it. I haven't used it much, but yeah.
Yeah, well, that's quite familiar now to many people. And so we often start with that. So you just take one big breath and you bring your awareness into the root of the body and you just sound the lam. And you sound it like they're two syllables, even though it's one apparent syllable. So lam, and the is very important because that joins the upper lower lips of your mouth and basically connects all the meridians from above the upper mouth and below the lower mouth and connects all the meridians all the way up over and the back of your body and back and round like a circuit. And so just la.
Oh, I could
Okay,
feel that all through my body.
great. And then vam is the sound of the pelvis, ram in the solar plexus, yam in the heart center, hum in the throat, om, the pineal gland, the third eye, and so hum, the crown. And so you're ascending, as you were speaking of earlier, you're experiencing that ascending up and out and expanding into much higher frequencies than the human body can thinks it can hear, right?
You're allowing your body to unfold into that whole universal thing as well, right?
Beautiful. And then you bring it back. So you bring it back and you receive, 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 receive. And either you sound it, so you come back down again with all those sounds, and these are all in the book and so on. And they're also these practices are all in an audio book that I made with Sounds True, which is called Awakening Through Sound, which is 5 CDs and a DVD. So people can.
Sounds absolutely wonderful, actually. But your book, why is it called The Naked Voice? I bet you I could make up a reason, but I want you to tell it.
Well, that the I coined the phrase naked voice when I came back from India because I was still in this completely unified state. The egoic mind had not returned, and I remember yet there was someone asking, "So, what's happening now? Chloe has died. So who's here? Who is here now? Chloe, as in Chloe." Her identity as Chloe, her identity as having the past historic narrative of Chloe. It was the sense that it was like a mask that had been taken off. And and I was asking myself, so who is here when Chloe disappears? What is left when Chloe disappears? And I started realizing that understanding of what is left, which is before words, it's not something the conceptual mind can even name. Nevertheless, I started to realize that this presence is all I could say. It was the only name I could give it, was an all-abiding presence that I was just walking about in. And that all-abiding presence showed up just wherever I was, whether I was in front of a tree, whether I was listening to two people arguing on a train, whether I was shopping, and just, whether I was in the bank, every single person had this presence in their voice. And yet they didn't seem to be able to recognize it as existing. They were very busy. Every time I asked somebody, so how do you feel about your voice? They would say, I haven't got one. Uh, Let me tell you how awful it is. I hate hearing myself on a microphone. I was told to shut up. I was thrown out of choirs. I mean, all these just sort of endless poor me narratives. And yet, all the time, I was hearing this voice within and behind the speaking or the communicating. And so I just aligned myself, and that imprint has remained. And so when I'm working with individuals, all I can say is that there is something naked in every single human being's sound, which if we can just access that naked place, it's prior to the conceptualizing mind. It's within it and it's beyond it. And it's everywhere. And so I realized that vocal practice was a kind of metaphor for finding our way back to that naked voice, which is beneath the personality voice, uh,
And I'll
beneath.
bet you that's really healing for people on the even on the physical level.
Oh God! I mean, it's just what's really awesome is that once you can be quiet enough and silent enough and non-judgmental enough to start really hearing it. And obviously there's so much teaching now about non-judgmental listening and empathic uh, presence and compassionate relationship and so on, that once you just start becoming quiet enough, skillfully quiet enough, you start to hear the sound of who you are. And that is actually accessed in silence. You know,
Wow.
yeah, the
I,
voice takes us there.
Chloe, I hate to say this, but we're out of time. But I'm going to ask you from the bottom of my heart, will you come back on again someday soon?
Oh, I would love to. That would be amazing. I realize we've been talking um, quite intensively, haven't we? For quite animatedly, and we're just sort of getting going.
I love this and I love your work, and we will definitely be in touch, and I want people to know exactly how to get hold of you, where you're going to be, what your the name of your book and your Sounds True CD set again, please.
Absolutely. Yes. That is, would you like me to share that?
Yes, please.
So that is Awakening Through Sound. And that sounds true. You can get that. You can get it online or you can get it as hard copy. If you live in England, you can get it from us directly, hard copy. My book is called The Naked Voice. There are two books. One's called The Naked Voice uh, Journey to the Spirit of Sound, which I wrote with Rider Books in 1993. It's a memoir. And then the more recent one, The Naked Voice uh, Transform Your Life Through the Power of Sound, is published through North Atlantic Books in 2015. And you can get that all and everywhere. That's on Amazon online. You can get it however you choose.
I just
Uh,
feel I want to go through all this material because I just know this is an amazing pathway into the integrated whole self, or the power of the silent self. Or I don't know how to put it in your terms, but in any case, I know
well,
this. Mm.
it's really fun because I've just started over this last 18 months working with the Shift Network online, and so it's really fun because they're just saying they feel it's the missing link and is possibly a bridge, between the traditions of spirituality and the new sciences, that it offers just another dimension that really dances and integrates so beautifully with new science and with spirituality. So that's very, very exciting to me. And the, just to finish with the concept of the singing field, which is really what I would call morphosonic field, uh, is really the absolute kernel of the collective work that we're now doing, networking and working uh, globally with people and working online with people from 39 different countries at once, uh,
Wonderful.
listening to each other, finding their voice. There's a whole piece we haven't done on poetry and
Perhaps you'll come on in maybe a month. Can you do that? Is that too soon?
I would adore to. I would be absolutely thrilled. I
Because I
just
don't want to
love.
squish these important things into this teeny bit at the end. I'd love to expand those with you.
Oh, that would be a great privilege and a great joy. Thank you so much for your quality of your listening, for your beautiful work.
Thank you
Uh,
so much to Chloe Goodchild. I am so honored to have had you on the show, and we're looking forward to maybe in a month or so. No promises for dates yet. We haven't worked it out. But this is Veronica Entwistle saying thank you so much for listening to Paradigm Shifters. And indeed, these are paradigm shifters. Speak again. Thank you.